load. But I wanted to thank BostonPHP for having me and all of us, and likewise Wayfair. If you are interested in following along as we go, that doesn't, well, it represents better from the front. So practical-a11y.now.sh, that's actually where I'm running this presentation off of right now. So you can go there now, and I'll probably update content as we get there. So who I am. Spencer Gregson. I work at Wayfair. We've already covered this. I'm what I would call an accessibility enthusiast. The idea of being an accessibility professional is incredibly intimidating. I own a cat and a plurality of bikes and guitars. Those are the things I love doing. And I used to be an architectural designer, which is, I think, where I got my start in all of this. So some context on all of that is that a lot of the web accessibility stuff is basically the same problem, just applied to a different way of implementing it. Ramps are basically the same thing as an onboarding modal, and the size of a button is the same thing as the size of a railing. You can kind of make the connections between all of that stuff. But what's really important to me that I found is that whether you're doing like a building project of this size, which was a city in Abu Dhabi that I was involved in the design of, or like iPad apps and stuff, accessibility is kind of everywhere. It's really important to keep in mind. It's why I'm doing this talk. It's probably why you're here, to learn something about this. And it's really important to what we do as creators of products and experiences and working with people. So all of that said, caveat slide, thoughts and opinions are my own, don't necessarily reflect. So let's dive into this. Okay, the road ahead. Someone at one point told me you need to tell people where you're going before you actually get there. So let's talk about what we're here to learn about today. Hopefully you're going to come away with 3 kind of developer-centric things about what accessibility is, if you don't know anything about it at this point, which is okay. How to do it, which is how to analyze whether you really need to be doing something additional that you're not already. And then once you've fixed it, where do you go from there? The goal of practical in this title is to not have to do this over and over and over again and see regressions pop up and have to fight this battle all the time. Hopefully, if you're working on accessibility and you love doing it, you're finding new areas to get invested in and finding a topic you hadn't previously loved, like color contrast or button focuses or any sort of thing. So what is accessibility even? For starters, you're going to see it abbreviated ALLI like a lot. It's the same thing as internationalization. If you haven't seen that, like I-18N, A11Y, there's 11 characters. It's kind of a pun. It also works with ally, being an ally to people, and Ally Bank and the British or whatever. But really it comes down to usability. We do software engineering. So usability actually has a very well-defined definition in software engineering. It's ISO 92441-11, which I actually really like this. It talks a lot about your audience and who you're building a product for, right? We don't just build tools for no reason. We have an audience and we have a customer, we have a client. Wayfair has customers. Accessibility is just usability like applied to a particular audience, those specified users. So usually it's better to just talk about usability than anything else. That's a really like generic and impersonal definition of accessibility. This is Stevie Wonder, if you can't recognize him from a distance. This was him on the 2016 Grammys when he pulled out an envelope, and it was done entirely in Braille, so he got a kick out of showing it to the entire audience and nobody could read it. But he said that we need to make every single thing accessible to every single person with a disability, and you better believe he shops online. So what you're probably here to know is like, how does it impact you as a developer of websites working on the web? How does it impact your site that you're actually building, and what you need to learn to kind of get there. So how does it impact you? First thing to know is that kind of requirements vary. If you work on, does anyone work on education or government websites even somewhat? Probably already know about Section 508.
Well, I was a co-op at a website studio that did only college websites.
Cool.
Accessibility is like number one.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, you don't want to get sued, and there's like various regulations there. I mentioned Section 508. I should mention, since these are all online, there's a bunch of links here. I'll follow some of them. I won't follow all of them. But education and government sites, as you already knew, it's really incredibly important. It's a requirement of anyone receiving federal money that they're accessible to all citizens. And the kind of final thing to know and how it impacts you is this is just something to keep learning about. Pretty much, I'm not going to say constantly because not everybody loves doing this specific thing all the time. Probably you want to learn about React and TypeScript some other times and proper PHP other times. But you can go and read the specification in this WCAG, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And there's like 4 principles and 13 guidelines and 73 acceptance criteria that then enumerate into all sorts of things inside of that. I touch on a handful of those here, but there is you could talk for 2 hours minimum if you talk really, really fast and get all of that content up there. So more the idea here of how it impacts you is try and build up the keywords and the lists of topics that make you think and ask that question, is this accessible? How it impacts your site, this is actually kind of like a double-sided sword, is like you just have a bigger audience. Like that's cool. You should be really excited about if you're selling products, making money from a new customer group, or I do front-end engineering, so it's really exciting to encounter new challenges and new audiences like that. And what it does for your site, though, is you start talking about functional testing and updates maybe to your tooling. And if you're really, really excited about this, you'll get into real user testing. That last bullet should hopefully be pretty minor. And again, back to the practical. The point is to make it easy. Like I said, learn to identify common patterns. And the big name here in accessibility is that Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, level AA. Diving into some of the stuff. Do these apply to you? Yeah, absolutely. Government and EDU, Section 508. And how I got into this was, are you selling things the public can buy? Wayfair? Yeah, it's probably, you should look into it. I put a little asterisk on this, and this is kind of the ending note on, like, does it apply to you? Is like, we haven't, as a country, really exactly figured out whether it applies to you in public space. Like, private websites technically are not a part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, until that is decided, you can still get sued, as everybody in this room probably is a little afraid of in some way in the back of their mind. But you might as well just do it. I think that's the thesis here, is that it's easier to do now and to look at now and take an incremental approach rather than waiting until you get sued, at which point it might be too late. So digging into the code, this is like the really exciting bits.
Is this the how to do it portion?
This is the how to do it portion,
okay.
Exactly. Which should have had a header for it. Yeah, this is we're fading into how to do it. These are some of the common patterns and things you should know. I guess this still lands under things you should know because you're gonna kind of just you look at code a lot, right, as an engineer, and you should be on the lookout for some typical patterns that are bad. This is probably my favorite because it's existed on the internet for like ever, 25 years minimum, right? href JavaScript void. If I never see that again, it'll be too soon. So these all fall under like fake elements as an idea. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at a link, the A tag, that doesn't have a page, the href.js bit. And then when you click on it, it takes you somewhere. I should mention all of these are just vanilla HTML. I fought every nerve in my body to not write React code because it's not React specific, it's not PHP specific, it's HTML, the HP of PHP, right? So here, this is not awesome because how somebody clicks on this, how do they know it's a link? The screen reader you come across won't announce that they're navigating to a page, and it's incredibly confusing when you click on something accidentally and it changes your context. So this is basically the same thing, the not a button. A div with an on-click handler. It's nearly identical here, but maybe it's doing an action, right? Think about a form submit at the end of a form in HTML. That should be just a submit button rather than like a div that does whatever it does. Looking at that better example, we have this like ingrown or learned behavior of removing HTML elements, right? We want less HTML. We want to make pages fast. This is still better because what you're really missing when you don't use a button or you use an A tag incorrectly is a whole surface area of things that you're not thinking about. Sometimes people ask me like, well, I really want it to be a div, like, aside from like why. Okay, let's have that conversation about like what would it actually take to make a div into a button. This is like dipping your toe in the surface area of what a button does, right? Like tab index lets you focus on a div. That's sure, like that gets you there. Then you need click and focus behaviors and hover and blur and key down and key up. Like all of that comes built into the HTML, and this is why this is probably one of the most common issues that you'd see. So what cost a div? Lessons from that start with HTML elements. The big takeaway is really a lot of sites don't need to do much more than have semantic HTML. You use buttons and you use form elements, you use an input or a page for what they're meant to do, and you get all of this for free. That hopefully means you don't have to learn it, or you learn about the exceptions. The other probably most common issue that is on that really, really big document of things is called text alternatives. We probably know them most on images, right? Is the image alt, right? We all kind of know what's wrong with this thing right now. What's wrong is it was missing.
There are some beginners in the audience.
Sorry, yes. Actually, as advertised, this requires absolutely no prior knowledge, so I appreciate that. Here, we're looking at an image tag that has a source pointing to like some fancy Unsplash website. The thing that's missing from this is an alt tag. The HTML alt tag, and I'm going to jump just to this guy, which is here, is as the header says, a text alternative. If you put your brain into the mode of somebody who can't see the website, they navigate by focusing very granularly on individual pieces of it, one at a time. They can't. They don't see the entire page for its context. So when you look at an image in this thing that's reading you what it is, you need a text piece of content to describe that. The reason I guess I said is like why this is bad is actually the alt text tag is required from the HTML spec. So if you ran your site through a validator, it's going to fail on this. If you ran it through any number of Google's tools about just HTML, not accessibility, just HTML quality, it's going to flag this. Again, it kind of comes back to the doing semantic HTML gets you things for free. And I'm going to touch on the more, this is an even fancier thing that I'll touch on here, but you come across ARIA. I don't know the right way to introduce ARIA because it's another incredibly big topic, but what we're doing here is ARIA stands for Accessible, Rich, Interactive. We're going to do this. We're going to go over here. Sorry for waking up.
I was enjoying my nap.
Yeah, right? The whole idea, you're right, accessible, rich internet application. The whole idea of the yellow was actually to wake people up at the end of the day. And also, we close with a joke about yellow, so gear up for that. The point of ARIA, accessible, rich internet application, or apps. You can put ARIA to solve on tags to solve problems. In this case, it says this image should be hidden. I'm positively certain that this is irrelevant content. Thinking about Font Awesome or iconography on your website. If you have a button that says submit, and that submit button also has an icon on it, do you need the icon? If it does something additional to submit, yes. If it doesn't, no. In this case, this is as I say, it's good for your fellow developer. You can't see me highlighting on that screen. Good for your developer, but it's not essential. These are actually redundant in terms of accessibility. And it gets, the reason you would even do it is because of cases like this. Most of us aren't writing vanilla HTML. This is the only, tried really, really hard. This is the only JSX, the JavaScript bit, but this should be a stand-in for data that comes from some service somewhere, right? You're getting it from the WordPress thumbnailer or any number of your advanced custom fields or content like that. But a user has submitted that data and you don't have control over what that thing is. Your hero image on your landing page varies, month to month, week to week, day to day, hour to hour in Wayfair's case, minute to minute, maybe. I'm getting nods from various people. Like that changes a lot. So how do you know that this actually represents the right thing for that image? And this is where most sites get into trouble in this case, is that there's not a tight connection between that. You haven't, in WordPress, given the user a required text entry that says, this image looks like a couch with a street lamp. A couch with a desk lamp. What this image is in real text. Without that, this would be empty, it would be ignored, and technically not complying with accessibility needs. It's enhancements, again. So getting around that, how to solve that problem, right, is about, and this is where the also difficult comes in our header here. This is incredibly common. This is any blog you read about accessibility, this will probably be in the first two items, is text alternatives, because it's for buttons, it's for imagery, it's for SVGs. All of them have a different way of putting a piece of text for something that's not textual, because you can always read it. You can have a Braille reader show you what that is. It's transformable media. In this case, I'm loosely representing like a data source, is that like you should get them from the same place, right? Like your image service should provide you a source and a title so that you have that. You should be able to connect to an advanced custom fields module that gives you both of those things, and you can set up those requirements. Or in the case of, depending on the language you use, some people use TypeScript, or if you have Flow, in those cases, a stronger typed language, you can proactively check against that. But you set up the controls and the boundaries to prevent it from happening. And a more subtle case, this kind of makes sense. More subtle case is this one, where you have an interactive thing, and provided you're using Font Awesome or you have the same image here, if you don't have content in here but you have a link, how do you know what that link does, right? How does that get you anywhere? Again, it's kind of like, say your link, I pulled that exit or submit icon here is the sign-in icon here. If you just see that on a page, we can probably infer it means go to the next page, but without a text alternative on here, you can't, it doesn't show up. Yeah, Steve.
How do screen readers actually interpret that? So if you've got a button and it's got an icon that has ostensibly, let's say, a pseudo element in it, what does it say? Does it say, hey, this is an icon, I don't know what it is, but it's an icon, or it's something, or is it just collapse?
It knows it's a button, right? So it does its best to actually tell you what content it knows about the area. So it will say you're navigating through your form list and you have an input name, password, etc., and then like your page with just an icon, it'll just say button. If this has submit on it, it'll say submit button because it knows the type of the thing. Yeah.
I think I actually just recently
to read out the actual URL, slashes
Mm.
and dots and everything. They just read what the link is instead of writing out the boxes.
In this case, there's no link.
Well, yeah, but if I remember correctly, that's what the result is. You have just not image, but the font awesome. And I think you can add a title to it as a backup.
Yeah. So I'm navigating to this website, and I'll take notes about the things. I'll leave these tabs open because I'll add this content to the links as they were there. But so I looked up is this website actually does a great job. This Power Mapper for screen reader compatibility. It's an incredibly complicated answer because we don't have control over what the users use. So I'm gonna try and find. This is an attribute button. We should do this by elements. They do a matrix of tests where they take an individual item and they test that against the combination of screen reader and browser type and see whether it actually does what it's supposed to. In the case of a button containing an image with no alt, this is exactly what we're talking about here. These things do the right thing. This is the red mark on the left gives the tag that says this should fail. This is supposed to not work, right? And it does so uniformly across the board, 100%. But what actually happens inside of it, it depends incredibly on what that is. And it might read button without saying what the button does. You might have unlabeled 3 button because it's the third item. You might have, in the case of JAWS with IE11, button ignored, just completely not there because it has no content. To the question of like what should we do, I think the answer is straightforward. What the customer experiences is even more complicated than responsive design, right? It's a matrix of not only browser type, but screen readers and variations. The aim, and I lean on this practical ideas, what we're not trying to do is necessarily go into every leaf, every endpoint of what this chart is, but rather know when it's wrong and prune it down exactly to things we can actually address, right? I have a reputation here for reading specifications because I'm a weirdo. I highly recommend it. It pays dividends in the long run because nothing tells you exactly how things work like the spec that works on it. But this is too much. This is even too much for me to get into the entire thing. Phase 2 here from lessons with missing alt, and this is the other useful item here, is the decision tree, is to find a short way of knowing whether you're doing it wrong. You don't need to know, because there are so many right ways of doing it, what exactly that one is, but rather find flowcharts and shortcuts and auditors that tell you actually like, does it contain text? No, okay, we need to move on to the next thing. If it contains text, there's a very specific thing to do. And you can kind of winnow your surface area there. In the how do I start and how do I do this section, which is next slide, is hopefully the answer doesn't start with learn the entirety of accessibility, the history, the beginning of time, and the origins and the direction of where we're going. The answer should be find a tool to help you address your problems and use that tool to prioritize the fixes you need to make. And you'll learn it as you go. That's how I did this. That's the only reason I know what I know these days. So I'm going to leave both of these open so that I can add them to the slide deck. Cool. All right, how do I start? That was the learning bit of like, these are 2 pieces of those 173 bits of what accessibility does. How do you even start? We validate our assumptions, right? I am incredibly fortunate to be very able. I'm a very privileged male, white. I work in software engineering. There are like so many ways we can talk about how like I can't really fully understand what it is to browse the internet with a screen reader, with a mobility or a cognitive impairment. So check yourself before you wreck yourself, that kind of thing. And embrace the fire hose, because this is a huge surface area. So your site might not be as bad off as you think, pro. If you're a pessimist, it could also be much worse. So what we want to do is we actually want to find out what this is. And there are so many tools in this space. The two that I would personally recommend in this area is Axe by this team, DQ University. That's fantastic. It is a great auditor. And Pali, still don't know how to pronounce that, which runs a version of the HTML code sniffer. Both of them have so many individual tools that you can find here. Axe is great because it has a Chrome extension, for example, with a full GUI that you can dig into. And did that open here? No, it opened here. A full GUI that you can dig into, and it will show you issues as you highlight them. This is a tool used under the hood by Google's auditor. There are, you get a nice inbox zero notice when you reach zero accessibility issues. And also Pali is fantastic. It has a command line tool and continuous integration. And these are kind of our guides here. If you've never tested your site before, the easiest way to get into it is to run one of these guys. Yeah, Steve?
Have you run the Wave tool at all?
Yeah.
How does that compare to these? Because I've run Wave and it says, oh, yeah, you're good. But then you actually try to, like, oh, you're not good.
So I'm realizing I should say questions out loud for the purposes of recording. In comparison to the Wave tool, these don't give you a singular like pass-fail. This is more like a long accreditation course with nuances and values. So speaking to Axe, for example, it will tell you when it knows something's a violation. It's conclusive about it, right? They ran a test, color contrast, suboptimal, not good. Your font size is too small, flunk. Like piece by piece, every node on your entire URL they're going to run against. Same thing with Pali, though it comes up with, they give you a error for conclusive, a warning for things that are recommended, and then suggestions. So you can actually triage from what this tool does, and this is why this is like, how do I start? Like, how do I start? Like, there are hundreds of people who have already put in time into this and have studied that surface area and how browsers work and how they interact with accessibility tools. There's a lot there. There are probably 30 tools not on this list that are like Wave. WebAIM is a site that manages their own one. The W3C maintains one. With the HTML5 validator, those all run there. These are more nuanced, I think, in terms of their validation. I keep gesturing my hand, unnecessary. I'm also not Italian, and they're a little bit more conclusive, I think, is the short answer on that. So we're going to talk about Pali on this one because it's where I got started. It has like a warm, fuzzy spot in my heart. All of these tools have a similar setup. And build time. So this was the slide that in talking at the beginning, I realized that some people might not have Node context here. So NPM is a tool that comes with Node.js. The only requirement for running this is to have Node on your machine, and then you can run these commands in terminal to do them. So the first one, npm install, finds that package, Pali, installs it on your machine so that you can use it forever. In this case, we're doing a global install once, and then we use a second tool that, again, comes with Node, and we don't reinstall it, and we run it against Google. I've kind of made the note here is that if you don't use no install, it's going to keep, it re-downloads every time. So you download a new instance of Chrome, which is something like 80 megs. Probably shouldn't do that while traveling. It's super slow. This helps it run wicked fast. And what you do when you run that, this is what I did, does your install pretty quick. This is my computer name and identity, so please don't steal that. And then you run it against whatever site you're kind of looking at. It checks against that URL and gives you this conclusion. Google is missing align attributes. I should have paused way longer on that, but there's a lot of, and I can run this kind of in browser if we want to do that next, but it will run those 173 auditors against that URL, check all of it, download the CSS, download all the images. Do the images point to a place that is real? Do they have alt text? Is that alt text empty? Does it have the word image of in it? Because that's also something you shouldn't be doing. It runs all that, all the things you forgot, and does that for you against that URL you were checking. You can run it against a series of things. You can queue up a whole crap load of URLs. Or probably the most effective in terms of running it here is like against a sitemap or a configuration object. If you're trying to be good for SEO and you don't have 7 to 9 million SKUs and unique URLs, you'll probably have a sitemap of your site, and you can run against that, and it'll just run every URL on your entire application. Cool. That's my take on getting started in this area, is take something that has already done the grunt work and the majority of learning for you and run it so you learn it progressively. We're all exposed to the web here. We've seen some stuff, right? We've been in this industry forever. You will pick it up. I'm not going to guarantee it. It's almost a guarantee. It's like, it makes more sense to have somebody who programmed a tool, who understands how web developers work, tell you the issues you're facing, rather than having to learn and read reams of paper, hopefully not paper, save trees, but about this subject. So what happens once you've run that and once you've fixed a URL, like how do you not do it again, right? How do you prevent this from happening forever? Because I don't want to fix alt text every day of my life. Again, PalICI, this thing you can configure, and this is the real cool stuff. It's pretty much what you would expect as this configuration. You have a little file, PalICI. It lives in your application, wherever PHP, there might be a composer instance. There's definitely a Selenium processor for Codeception. But it has what you would expect, kind of defaults for how to configure it, and an array of URLs to check rather than that sitemap. But where it gets really cool is how in-depth you can prescribe how it crawls your site. This is a hint of the surface area, right? You have a login page where people can't get to image submission unless they've logged in as a user. You can automate that. It's like Codeception, Selenium, auto tester. There are too many automation tools in the business to name. But it's human readable. It has a documentation about what those things are. You can pretty much read through this and understand what it's trying to do is get to a tab, provide some details about your name. You can screen capture along the way to see whether there was a failure in that so that you can actually look at color contrast or something. Provide the login and then navigate to another page, and it will run once it's executed all of those actions. It's pretty cool. This like blew my mind when I dug into this. So the actions documentation I definitely put in here because again, learning, waking everyone up. It's everything you would expect. It's basically the entire HTML structure. Wait for the URL to do something. Wait for an element to appear, et cetera, et cetera. It goes in crazy. What that means is that you can fix a URL, you can fix a page type, you can put it in your documentation and put it in a config file, and then anytime that runs, say you're using Travis CI or you're using GitLab's build pipelines, you can put this in there and prevent issues before they even go to production. That, again, topic for another DevOps conversation of how you build and how you deploy and all of that. But you can take this tool, put it into the middle of that, and let people know when problems are happening. So the tools to learn and the tools to get into this are the same tools that will sustain your website over time, which is pretty key. Persistent automation is just as easy as doing it in person, depending on your scale, asterisk. And hopefully spot checking your site is pretty darn straightforward. So hopefully here, I lied, there's 4 sections. Hopefully here the takeaway is, wow, this is super straightforward. I know that's not the case. because it's such a big area. Hopefully, how to approach it is super straightforward. Really, this is what we're trying to do, is make a usable site for everyone, reach the largest audience you can, make a good website that functions and does things really exciting. If you're looking to learn, that WCAG document and level AA is the best practice in the industry right now. And they will give nuanced definitions of every one of those issues. Any one of those issues raised by that auditor, they will talk your ear off, and you will lose years of your life to it. And there are a ton of tools. I kind of touched on 2 here, but there are tools at all areas of the application development lifecycle. Build time static analyzers if you're in React. There's an ESLint plugin for that. There are plugins for TSLint, and I think there is there's a PHP Storm plugin that will do it if you're coding in PHP Storm. Runtime to find issues like that text alternative wasn't there. You can patch React, for example, and when it renders on your page, it'll tell you about issues. And then these ones are what I would call document parsing, as they accept a URL or they accept a pseudo URL, a DOM, and you can run against that. Yeah.
So if you're coding in PHP, what exactly is it testing?
Yeah, yeah. So it depends on how you echo and create. So when I was writing in our PHP model view controller system here, it can still identify HTML element types depending on whether you're like echoing content. It's very contingent, but like if it can identify the syntax tree and what the actual element is, it can run that and check whether that whole text is empty, whether you put a click handler on something that you shouldn't. To be frank, I haven't gone deep in the PHP Storm plugin ecosystem. The gist of it is like the build time and static analysis can only get you so far, because what really matters is what the customer sees or what you render. So you could optimize for build time and static analysis till you're blue in the face, but if you still are sending bad text alternatives to a button, it's all for naught, really. So that's why this presentation covers DOM parsing, Axe, and Pally. That's where you're going to get the most effective value out of your tooling. So, in closing, what it is, how to do it, preventing regressions, keep those problems fixed, and hopefully they don't come up again. As the closing bit, I ran this against this website that this is running on, and it has problems. So what I'm going to do is actually address these kind of when we're done here. You'll see these are exactly those issues. Image missing alt text. My GIFs don't have text alternatives that explain that this is a screencast of running Pally on my website. The role of button doesn't actually have a name available. I don't. Can you pause GIFs? I don't think so either.
I don't know how to do that.
That's an accessibility issue. And has a button, but it doesn't have a name available. That's the exact issue Steve was asking about. But hopefully it should be easy to fix because I can chase these down from here rather than anywhere else. So, thank you.